أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum everyone and welcome to our daily iTVusa show, Balancing Deen and Dunya. My name is Dr. Suzy Ismail and I'm happy to be with you again as we continue to meet different community members, organization leaders and inspirational figures who talk to us a little bit about their journeys in their lives and the work that they do and how they manage to balance both Deen and Dunya. So today we have with us a guest by the name of Calvin Belden. Brother Calvin is a software developer at a large technology firm that's based in New York. He reverted to Islam in 2020 and has lived in numerous places throughout the US. He was first born and raised in Minnesota, then attended the University of Notre Dame in Indiana, and from there he moved to Chicago. Eventually, he found himself in California, where he resided for 6 years. He also is currently in New York, which is what I understood in our conversation earlier. He's passionate about many different things, including drinking coffee and playing hockey. And I'm happy to have Brother Kelvin on the show with us.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. I know the days of Ramadan are often busy, so we appreciate our guests making time for joining us on this program.
Of course.
So, as we were talking a little bit before the show started, Brother Calvin, you were mentioning, your journey throughout the U.S. It sounds like you've lived in several different places, life in the Midwest, then California, then New York. Tell me a little bit about your journey. What took you to all these different places that you lived in?
So for the most part, work has taken me to my first big cities that I lived in after graduating from college. So my first job was at a small web consulting company in Chicago, and I lived and worked there for a year and a half, which was a nice jumping off point because it was still pretty close to my family. And then I eventually got a job out in California. And so I lived and worked out there for I think almost 7 years. And then that's where I met my wife. And so after a while, we decided to move to New York, which is where she's from. And so now we've been in New York and we're close to her family.
Okay, I hear you. So you reverted to Islam in 2020. What was the drive? And tell us a little bit about what brought you to Islam.
So my now wife introduced me to Islam, and I started reading books about Islam, took online courses, and ultimately became convinced of the revelation to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
Did you grow up in a religious family when you were younger?
Yeah, so I was raised Lutheran, which is a flavor of Christianity. And that's definitely, as soon as I had actually taken a college course on Islam, so I didn't come in like totally blind. But that is something that resonated with me, is that Islam has so many of the same themes from Christianity.
Okay. So when you accepted Islam and entered into the faith, how did your family respond? What was the reactions you kind of got from people that you knew?
Yeah, I think my close family, it was definitely hard at first. Like, I think they were very concerned that converting to Islam would mean that they were like losing me as a son, or losing contact with me, or I was going to turn into a different person. And so that was really challenging. And I think that's from meeting other reverts, I don't think that that's uncommon. And so I think over time, like, my wife and I have shown them, and will hopefully continue to show them, that converting to Islam doesn't mean that they're losing a son. And if anything, it means I'll hopefully hold myself to a higher standard.
Okay. So are you able to visit with family, since you're living in New York and I guess they're still in the Midwest?
Yeah, alhamdulillah, we're closer now that we're in New York, so the flight's a little bit shorter. And so we've actually been able to go to Minnesota twice this year already. So yeah, traveling is a little bit easier from the East Coast versus the West.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. So what have been like your biggest challenges in your journey towards Islam?
So I think some of the biggest challenges I'm currently facing are learning Arabic so that I can properly read and recite the Quran. So that's something I still haven't done. I have I'm still a baby when it comes to learning Arabic, and so that is definitely difficult. But I've been trying to work on that, and of course, the amount of time that I'm able to spend working on that sort of ebbs and wanes. And so I'm hoping to build up some good habits during Ramadan that I can continue during the rest of the year. And then besides that, I think it's just slowly sort of dipping my toes into like the Muslim community, spending more time at the masjid, trying to show up for more prayers. So I think it's not like necessarily like any big hurdles, but just sort of like this like slow progress that I'm always trying to work on.
So yesterday on our show, we had Sister Nahila, who is the head of the organization called Embrace, which focuses on providing services by reverts for reverts. And she was sharing a little bit about her journey. And one of her points of pain, I would say, was that when she first accepted Islam, and we often see this in the masajid around us, there's this thrill, this excitement, you have, brothers and sisters coming and, saying salam, and you feel very connected. And she said it just took a few days later and it was as if everyone had forgotten about her and she felt very disconnected. Have you experienced that all among the Muslim community?
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that. I would say, I think part of the problem too is that at least in New York City, a lot of the masajid are also like ethnic enclaves. And so everybody who's already there just has like so much of this shared like culture and maybe even language. And so if you're not part of that culture, then it can be isolating. So that's just that's without even being a revert, right? And so then if you're a revert on top of that, then yeah, it can be even more isolating. So I've had like varying degrees of success, I would say, connecting with various Muslim communities, but my wife and I are in the process of actually moving to a new part of New York City in Queens. And so I'm hopeful that our masjid there, I'll be able to be more involved. And yeah, I might just have to work harder to introduce myself to the community and make sure they see my face regularly.
Yeah. So presence is definitely, part of it. But what else would you advise our viewers who maybe are attending different masajid, are there for that initial shahada, especially during the last 10 nights of Ramadan? We tend to see it, mashallah, frequently. What, as someone who has experienced it, who's been on the other side, what would you advise our viewers about, interacting with reverts?
Yeah, so I don't know if I've cracked the case, so to speak, about really ingratiating yourself into the community at the masjid, because I have not been super successful in that. But where I have seen more success is that there's lots of other organizations outside of the masjid that can help, especially for reverts. So one example, so actually at the NYU Islamic Center, they have a regular meeting for reverts where my wife and I were actually able to meet other reverts and like we've hung out with them outside of those. And so that's a good way of like just introducing yourself to people who are in similar situations, and being able to make those connections so that you have like a little bit more of a support group.
Yeah.
My wife and I have also been involved in other Muslim organizations like there's a New York City Muslim Run Club. There was one in San Francisco that we were part of. There was also a like young Muslim meetup group in San Francisco that we helped organize. And so those are other ways where you can meet other reverts and other young Muslims if you're not necessarily seeing them at the masjid.
Yeah. So I love the idea of, finding different spaces that are built around affinity. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in a masjid that may be more ethnically focused, but finding those spaces, throughout, particularly in a place like New York. I think there's a lot of avenues for connecting with other people.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the other topics that we had talked about on the show with another guest previously was the impact of education and how sometimes you don't know what word someone is going to say that's going to, be the means by which Allah Azza wa Jal softens your heart or brings you to Islam. In your journey, have you been inspired by any speakers or teachers, as you're researching, anyone that kind of spoke to you or words that spoke to you that may have pulled you towards the deen?
I can't remember specifically, but one of the books that I read that ultimately brought me to Islam was Being Islam. And the author's brother, Amjad Tarsin, actually taught a course on the book. And so after reading the book, I sort of I watched his course. And so of course the book itself has lots of great material, but
Mhm.
I just thought that Amjad Tarsin was a really great teacher and was super kind and gentle. And so I found that to be very comforting, and it definitely guided me.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. And I think it's, when we look at from the Islamic perspective, the importance of the ummah, the community, the importance of suhbah, the friendships, but also the importance of the isnad, almost the chain of in which, education is passed on, the chain of narration that we refer to in hadith, but as related to how we learn and how we grow. So I'm going to step away from the journey towards Islam, and I want to ask you a little bit more about some of the other journeys you've been involved in. So I know that you are heavily involved in the software world. That this is your career, the path you followed. And although I don't know much about software, I have been following bits and pieces of the AI revolution, the Chat GPT, and how that's changing things. First of all, tell me a little bit, in terms of what field of software you're in, what it is that you do, and share with us your thoughts about what's happening with AI.
Sure. So I'm a web developer. So I work on websites, and I currently work on a website that plays videos. And so my expertise is really around making sure that the website runs fast and doesn't crash. And that was sort of my first job out of college, was at a web consulting company. And so that's where I sort of developed those skills.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does AI play a role in any of this?
My day-to-day does not involve too much AI. So I'm pretty unqualified to speak or to comment on the recent phenomena of ChatGPT. And from what I've seen, it's a really powerful tool, but it should be used with a grain of salt. I think it can produce wildly inaccurate results, and if you're not careful, it could definitely mislead you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So we'll stay away from ChatGPT and AI and we'll move into topics that are more related to your own experiences. So you mentioned meeting your wife while you were working in California. What was that journey like? It seems to me that maybe she was, coming from a Muslim background initially. Maybe ethnic backgrounds are different. Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, so that journey was a friendship that ultimately turned into a courtship and then marriage. So my wife and I always were always best friends first, and then we're husband and wife second. But the journey was, yeah, it took a while, and there were many moments of doubt. Conversion was not always like on the table for me. So that's something that happened over time, and ultimately, when I became convinced of the religion, that's when I decided to convert.
Law. Okay. Was it difficult marrying, into your wife's family, or being someone again, different background, different ethnicity, and growing up in a different faith?
Alhamdulillah, it has not been very difficult. So my wife's family has been super welcoming to me. I've been treated with nothing but kindness and respect. I mean, almost from day one, it was like I was sort of embedded in the family unit. So that's been really, really nice.
MashaAllah. And I think we've actually hosted your father-in-law on this show previously. I believe he was on the very first night. So it's nice to be able to meet other members of the family. So I know a lot of, in the work that we do at Cornerstone, which is counseling, one of our divisions focuses on premarital counseling. And a lot of young couples do come to us with difficulties and issues because, one person is coming from a different, faith background, different ethnic background, and they hit these walls, they struggle in being accepted, in being able to move forward. Any advice that you would have for couples who maybe are coming from different backgrounds and seeking marriage?
Yeah, I mean, I know it's kind of bound to happen when you have two individuals who are from very different backgrounds, maybe even different faith backgrounds. I do think that coming from a Christian background, converting to Islam is not it's not so different really. I mean, most of the fundamental beliefs are the same. We all believe in the Abrahamic religion, so to speak. And so religiously, I wouldn't say it was too big of a stretch. Culturally, I think there is. I mean, my family is really like the unit of family is sort of the nuclear family, but then my wife's family, like your nuclear family, is actually like your aunts and uncles, your cousins, your extended family, and that's been beautiful. Like I think that's great. But I haven't come across too many cultural differences where we've been butting heads. And so to couples who are maybe experiencing that or experiencing impasses, like I think it's important to remember, why you're there and why you're working on that. Keep in mind like your larger goal and also understand that, yeah, people come from many different backgrounds. Values are different, which might lead to totally different preferences and arguments. So I think it's hard, but if you can hopefully keep your respect for one another and your families, but also like protect yourself because I know a lot of people deal with extended families who are maybe not treating them very well, and so it's okay to stick up for yourself and what you believe in.
Yeah, that's good advice. So tell me a little bit, Brother Calvin, about, what you learned about yourself as you traveled, because it sounds like you started traveling, from home at a young age, going from Minnesota to Indiana to study in college, and then from there going to California, which is a bit of a big move, or maybe there was Chicago in between there. I know there was a couple of moves, but we often hear that, through travel, you get to learn more about yourself. What did you learn about yourself through your travel?
One thing I definitely learned about myself was just how important it is to be close to family. So in Chicago, I was fortunate enough to have a cousin and an aunt in the city. And I also had some friends who would invite me over to their families' homes for dinner. And even if it wasn't my family, it was still really nice to be with a family.
Mhm.
And then when I moved to California, I felt pretty isolated at first, but one of my best friends from college had already been living out there. And he and his wife would invite me to his wife's family events. So his wife comes from a big family in the Bay Area. And so I made myself sort of a regular at their family gatherings.
Mhm.
And so being able to participate in family functions like that was really nice and made it a little easier being far away from my own family. And
Okay.
of course now that we're in New York, I mean we moved here to be close to family. So
Okay. Okay. And I think that's, sometimes we see the differences, particularly, within the Muslim community where there's a very deep push for collectivism. You operate as a whole, and as you said, it's not just a nuclear family of like mom, dad, and kids, but you're talking uncles and cousins and grandparents and, great grandparents, even in cases. Whereas many times, from a Western conceptualization, there's more of that individualistic push. It's more, you're kind of on your own, and sometimes you start to see the value of the collectivism, maybe, which seems to be what you've experienced.
yeah, I think there's definitely benefits of going out on your own because I think you learn to be self-sufficient. But of course you can't do everything on your own. So it's important to have that support system.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned in your bio some of your hobbies. It said that you enjoy hockey, you enjoy coffee, which sounds really good right now while fasting. Tell me a little bit more about your hobbies and what you engage in.
Yeah, so yeah, coffee and hockey are my two favorite hobbies. So I try to play hockey like once a week. Um, Alhamdulillah, we're moving to a new place, which is like 7 blocks from the hockey rink, so I'll be able to walk there, which is great.
Mhm.
And then I've really enjoyed coffee and learning about coffee, the history of coffee, how to make it as tasty as possible. And so we've been going through decaf beans for iftar, which has been really fun.
So do you see like a career change in the future, like going from software to like opening a coffee shop, maybe?
I I joke about opening a coffee shop. I don't
Mm.
think I wouldn't bank on a career change anytime soon. But I think the idea of it is kind of fun. And so I'll kind of research like what would it actually take and what would the hours look like? How much capital do you need to open up a little shop? But I don't see any changes in the near future.
I hear you. I hear you. So let's talk a little bit more about your present career. I know a lot of our viewers, and particularly young folks, for a good, decade or more, felt that, software, IT, something, computer science, something in the computer field or the internet technology field was the way to go in terms of job security, in terms of growth. But lately, within the past year, I've definitely been hearing kind of like a different tune being sung, layoffs happening, the job market being difficult. What's your take on careers in the software field?
Yeah, I think we've definitely seen a bit of a pullback in the industry, and I think some companies and maybe some um, areas within tech have been impacted more than others. But my company has experienced layoffs, and I know a lot of other companies have experienced layoffs. But that said, I think the long-term overall trend of tech is still growing. I think we still need more people who know how to write software, who know how to build hardware. So although there's like this sort of short term slump, I think in the long term, technology is still a core part of many businesses. And I think it's just going to continue to be an important part of the economy. And
Okay.
I think it's important for Islam too. Like I would love to at some point be able to dedicate some of my time to help Masajid maintain their websites and make sure that um, their their communities have easy access to accurate information.
Mhm.
Many of the Masajid that I go to do not maintain their websites. The prayer times are out of date, and so I think we could help a lot of communities if we had some more software developers working on websites for Masajid.
Mm. No, I love that. I think our organization might need to be in touch with you to to improve ours as well. So walk us through a typical day for you. Like if somebody is thinking about a career in the software field and the tech field, what do you normally do on a typical day?
Yeah, so my day, I spend probably about like 20 to 30% of my time in meetings. And so I might be meeting with other software developers and we might be talking about things that they're blocked on and how to move forward. So there's definitely a big social aspect to being a software developer. You're working with other people, you're working with other software developers, but you're also working with non-technical people who are maybe they're asking for a new feature to be built on their website and they're describing it to you and you're maybe going back and forth with them explaining, okay, this would be easy to do, this is not possible, maybe we could compromise. But then the most majority of my time is spent actually writing code, fixing bugs,
Mhm.
but also reviewing other people's code.
Okay. Okay. So is it a work from home? Like, do you work remotely or do you have to go into the office?
Yeah, so I do have office space, but I primarily work from home. But I would say after the past like 3 years, I definitely miss going into the office more and
Mhm.
want to make that more part of my weekly routine.
Okay. So you're able to go into the office if you so choose, but you don't necessarily have to.
That's right.
Okay. So how has, particularly post-COVID, when there was this huge shift for so much, work being done remotely, how do you think that's impacted work ethic? How has it impacted output maybe? Has it been stronger? Is it weaker? What do you see?
I think at my organization, I believe that leadership is seeing that output is maybe down a little bit. Whether that's just due to working from home, I'm not sure. Like, there's so many other factors going on. But I know that going into the pandemic, I actually thought that I was more productive working from home just because there were fewer interruptions. But after 3 years of working from home, I'm like almost like I
Mhm.
think I need to like. It's almost easier going into the office and then there's no like I'm just focused on work. There's no other things going on. So I've maybe done like a 180 on like what I think is more productive, and I think for myself personally, like a hybrid approach would probably allow me to be as like the most productive I could be. There's going to be days where I'm going to be able to get more work done if I can skip the commute
Mhm.
and just work from home. Um, but some other times, like it might be better to be in an environment where there's fewer distractions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we're seeing a lot of, increases in terms of social anxiety, depression, and some other mental health struggles post-COVID that, part of it is attributable to the pandemic itself, but I do think part of it is also attributable to the social isolation maybe that's been felt, because you can only do so much with Zoom, right? There's still a bit of a difference, in connecting in real life, in real time.
Yeah, I mean, I totally resonate with that personally. Like, I definitely have social anxiety going out to outings,
Mhm.
and it seems like it's maybe worse than pre-pandemic, but it's hard to tell.
I see. So before we wrap up in the last couple of minutes that we have together, we do like to ask all of our guests, regarding balance. How do you find your pathway of balance, balancing Deen and what it means to be a Muslim American, and a recent revert on top of that, and Dunya, what you might be, your goals, what you're chasing after, what it is that you're doing in your day to day.
Yeah, I think it can definitely be a struggle, and I think the amount of effort and focus that I'm putting on Dean can often come at the expense of Dunya. And so that's why, like, I really try to take advantage of Ramadan to try to build in some good habits that I can continue for the rest of the year. And maybe that means like going for one more salah every day to the masjid than I was the previous year. Maybe it means spending a little bit more time reading my Quran instead of leaving it on my, dusty on the bookshelf.
Mhm.
But I'll try to set goals around like, okay, I want to memorize one more new surah. So I try to organize, I kind of rally around Ramadan so that I can maybe get some goals and habits in place that I can maybe carry through the rest of the year. But even if I'm not explicitly reading Quran, memorizing surahs at the masjid, I think that in your day-to-day life, you can turn your dunya activities into acts of worship. So performing, doing your best at work, trying to bring excellence in everything that you're doing, taking care of your family, doing favors for them, cleaning up around the house. So I'll also try to work in those acts of worship as well. And those are usually easier for me. Um,
Jazakallahu khair. I think that's good wisdom that all of us can kind of keep in mind. And thank you again for joining us on our show. Just to recap for our viewers who may have joined us a little bit late, it's been an honor to have Brother Calvin with us today. He spoke to us a little bit about his journey in terms of the software field. The prognosis or the outlook is pretty good. That the software field is still thriving. The tech field, internet field, it's still a space where careers are strong. Brother Calvin shared a little bit as well about his own journey towards Islam, and his travels, where life took him from the Midwest to the West Coast, now back to the East Coast, and what he learned about himself through that journey. So it's been absolutely wonderful getting to speak to you, to hear your thoughts. And I think the last bit of advice that you shared with our viewers about trying to find balance and recognizing that when we do our day-to-day work with ihsan, with excellence, when we really ensure that our intentions are sincere in everything that we do. Acts such as helping around in the house, taking care of our family, being good to our community, being kind, all of these are forms of worship, are forms of ibadah that are pleasing to Allah. So once again, Jazakallah khair for joining us, and to all of our viewers, Jazakumullah khair for being with us today. I hope that I'll get to see you all again tomorrow on our iTVusa show, Balancing Deen and Dunya, at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.